The Witch and the Definitely Dead Detective by Sadie Brent, Chapter 7, Heart to Hearts and Revelations. The sunlight had shifted to a softer golden hue by the time Evie returned to the inn. The day's events weighed heavily on her shoulders as she trudged up the creaking stairs to her room, Spinks trotting ahead as though the weight of the world was no concern of his. Once inside, she dropped her bag by the door, sank into the cushioned armchair by the window, and stared out at the distant rooftops of Stony Fork. Spinks, sensing her restlessness, leaped onto her lap, nudging her hand for attention. She fished her phone out of her pocket and scrolled to Annie's name. Annie would know what to say. She always did. The phone rang twice before a familiar, bubbly voice answered. "Evie, oh my gosh, how's small-town life treating you? Have you discovered a secret pie recipe or joined a quilting circle yet?" Evie let out a soft laugh, the sound easing the knot of tension in her chest. "Not quite, but Annie, I don't know what I'm doing here. I have discovered I'm hopelessly out of my depth. It's like stepping into someone else's life." "Uh-oh," Annie said, concern lacing her voice. "Start at the beginning. Spill. What's going on?" Evie recounted her whirlwind of a week, finding out more about the inheritance, the conditions of Lizzie's will, and the surreal experience of stepping into the Silver Sage Naturals shop. She even mentioned the unsettling energy she'd felt there, though she kept her tone light to avoid sounding too woo-woo. She described the mysterious note from Hugo Bates, the strange energy in the shop, and the overwhelming task of deciding whether to stay. When she finally paused for breath, Annie didn't respond right away. Instead, Evie heard the faint sound of typing on a keyboard. "Are you Googling Hugo Bates?" Evie asked with a chuckle. "Of course I am. Do you think I'm going to sit here and not investigate? Give me a second." Annie hummed thoughtfully. Looks like he's the owner of some bookstore/antique shop in town. Pretty low profile, but he's been in business for a while. Nothing shady popping up yet, but that note you found? Kind of gives me villain vibes." "Tell me about it," Evie said, leaning back in her chair. But Lizzie seemed to trust him enough to let him make an offer for the shop. That's what I don't get. "Maybe it wasn't trust so much as politeness," Annie offered. "Or maybe he thought he could push her into selling." "Maybe," Evie murmured, staring out the window again. "It just feels off." "So," Annie said carefully, "what's your gut telling you? About staying, I mean. Forget Hugo for a second. Do you feel like this is something you could do?" "And forget the practical stuff. What does your gut say?" Evie hesitated. "My gut is confused. On one hand, it feels right being here, like maybe I could belong. The town is lovely, and the shop is, well, it's incredible, but the responsibility feels huge. I'm scared I'll screw it all up. But then I think about the responsibility, the risk of failing. What if I can't live up to Lizzie's expectations? What if I'm just not enough?" "Evie," Annie said gently, "you're one of the most capable people I know," Annie said firmly. "You've been through so much, and you've come out stronger every time. Running a shop? You can handle it. Lizzie wouldn't have left this to you if she didn't believe in you. And you don't have to be perfect right away. You'll figure it out. One day, one step, one lavender-scented sachet at a time. And you'll have help, right? That lawyer guy, what's his name?" Evie laughed. "You make it sound so easy." "Easy? No? Worth it? Yes. And listen, small-town life might surprise you. I can already picture you fitting in there, making the shop your own, having cozy conversations with eccentric customers. And if it doesn't work out, there's that grace period, right? But don't let fear be the reason you say no." "And his name is Marcellus," Evie supplied. "Yeah, him. He sounds like he's got your back. And hey, if nothing else, you'll have a built-in excuse to avoid holiday dinners with your extended family. Win-win." Evie laughed, despite herself. "You always know how to put things in perspective." Evie stared out the window, her friend's words resonating in a way that made her chest ache. "Thanks, Annie. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd survive. You're tougher than you think," Annie said with a grin in her voice. "But hey, don't leave me hanging. Text me updates, pictures, and let me know if you stumble on a secret potion recipe, preferably one that makes my ex disappear." Evie laughed again, the warmth of their banter lifting her spirits. "Deal." The next morning, Evie met with Marcellus in the cozy sitting room of the inn. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, and the faint aroma of coffee mingled with freshly baked scones. Spinks curled up at Evie's feet, his eyes lazily watching the world go by. Marcellus folded his hands on the table and leaned forward. "Have you come to a decision?" Evie took a deep breath, her conversation with Annie still fresh in her mind. "Yes, I'm staying." Marcellus's face softened with a genuine smile. "I'm glad to hear that. Lizzie would be too." For a moment, his professional mask slipped, and Evie saw a flicker of something deeper. Grief, perhaps, or admiration for Lizzie. "You knew her well, didn't you?" Evie asked softly. "I did," Marcellus said, his gaze dropping briefly to the table. "She wasn't just a client, she was a dear friend, a mentor even. Lizzie had a way of drawing people in, of making you feel you belonged." He smiled faintly. "She had a sharp wit and an even sharper sense of justice. She always fought for what she believed in." Evie nodded, taking in his words. Yet in the back of her mind, that tiny voice whispered, "He's the sole executor of the estate. He had access to everything Lizzie left behind. Wouldn't that give him the perfect opportunity to—" She shook off the thought, a pang of guilt following in its wake. Marcellus had been nothing but kind and supportive. There was no reason to doubt his intentions. Still, she couldn't resist asking, "How did you and Lizzie become friends? You seem so different." Marcellus smiled faintly, as though expecting the question. "It's a long story, but I'll give you the short version. When I was younger, teenager, actually, I made some stupid choices. One of those choices was trying to shoplift from Silver Sage Naturals." Evie blinked in surprise. "Lizzie caught you?" "She did," he said, his expression tinged with nostalgia. "But she didn't call the sheriff. Instead, she gave me a job. Said if I had so much time on my hands, I could put it to better use, stocking shelves and cleaning jars. At first, I thought it was just punishment, but over time, we got to talking. She saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. She said I had a sharp mind for numbers and business. Eventually, she convinced me to go to college. Helped pay for it, actually, on the condition that I'd become her lawyer and financial advisor." Evie's suspicion evaporated like mist in the morning sun. "She must have meant a lot to you." "She did," Marcellus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Lizzie changed my life. I owe her everything." Evie smiled, feeling the warmth of his words settle in her chest. "She had a way of bringing out the best in people, didn't she? She sounds amazing. I wish I'd known her better." "She did. You'll get to know her in your own way, through her work, her shop, and the people whose lives she touched. That's part of her legacy." Marcellus agreed. Then he straightened, his tone becoming businesslike again. "Now, let's talk about next steps. There's some paperwork to finalize, and we'll need to set a timeline for officially reopening the shop. I'll also connect you with the suppliers Lizzie used. They're some of the best in the business." As Marcellus continued, Evie felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't doing this alone, and with Marcellus's help, maybe, just maybe, she could turn Lizzie's legacy into something extraordinary.